On a cold August night in 1936, a zookeeper forgot to bring an animal inside before locking up. The temperature dropped. The animal had no shelter. By morning, it was dead. That animal was the last thylacine on Earth. The photos on this list are the final records of animals that no longer exist anywhere on Earth. Some vanished because of deliberate hunting, some because of habitat destruction, some because of superstition or greed or a government bounty or a single preventable mistake. Every one of them had a last individual, a last photograph, a last sighting, a last moment before the line went permanently silent. These are their stories. Number 10. The Zanzibar leopard. It was not the largest leopard, not the most powerful, not the most studied. The Zanzibar leopard was simply a small, fast, intelligent cat that lived on an island and was destroyed by a story people chose to believe. For generations, the leopard survived quietly in the dry bush of Zanzibar, Tanzania, hunting pigs, monkeys, and small animals. It had lived there long before any human settlement existed. It avoided people naturally. It was not aggressive. It caused minimal disruption. Then in the 1960s, the Tanzanian government labeled it dangerous. Livestock killings were blamed on the cats. Reports spread of leopards entering villages at night. And then came the claim that traditional healers were using leopards as spirit animals, controlled by witches, sent to cause harm. These stories moved fast through communities with no access to counter-information. The government launched a formal extermination campaign. Officials encouraged villagers to shoot on sight. Bounties were placed on the cats. A species that had once moved silently through the forest was now hunted as an enemy. Not of the ecosystem, but of the supernatural. By 1990, the last confirmed sighting was recorded. No tracks followed. No animals were captured. Only a handful of photographs remained as proof the animal had ever existed. In 2003, a National Geographic team filmed something leopard-shaped moving through the forest. Hope spread briefly across the island, but no prints, no scat, no follow-up footage confirmed it. Scientists could not verify the sighting, and nothing has emerged since. The Zanzibar leopard may be the only animal on this list destroyed not by hunting for profit or food, but by fear. A fear deliberately cultivated, officially endorsed, and impossible to walk back once the last leopard was already gone. Number 9. The Great Auk. The great auk had survived on the North Atlantic for millions of years. It stood upright like a small child, swam with extraordinary speed, and raised exactly one egg per year on the remote rocky islands of Canada, Iceland, Greenland, and Northern Europe. It had no natural land predators. It had never needed to develop fear of anything approaching on foot. That was the thing that ended it. When sailors first encountered great auk colonies, the birds did not run. They had no instinct to. Hunters walked straight into the nesting grounds and picked them up by hand. No nets, no traps, no skill required. Entire colonies were slaughtered for meat, for feathers stripped off to fill pillows, for fat melted down into lamp oil. Ships sailed specifically to Great Auk Islands with the purpose of wiping out colonies in a single trip. The birds simply stood and waited. By the early 1800s, the population had collapsed to almost nothing. And then something genuinely extraordinary happened. Something that reveals exactly how humans were thinking at the time. Collectors decided they wanted specimens of the last great auks. Museum curators, private collectors, wealthy enthusiasts. They offered enormous sums of money for eggs and stuffed bodies of a species they were watching disappear in real time. This created a race. Whoever found the final survivors first could claim the last egg, the last mounted skin, the most valuable extinction trophy in history. The end came on June 3rd, 1844, on a small Icelandic island called Eldey. 3 men found a pair of great auks guarding their single egg. The birds tried to flee. They were too slow. The men killed them both. During the struggle, the egg was crushed under a boot. That pair is believed to be the last great auks that ever lived. There is no film, no audio, only drawings, written accounts, and the knowledge that the species trusted people. And that trust was precisely what made it so easy to destroy. Number 8. The gastric-brooding frog. To look at it, you would have seen nothing unusual. A small, quiet frog blending into the wet floor of an Australian rainforest. Unremarkable, easy to overlook. But inside its body, something that had no right to exist was happening. The gastric-brooding frog swallowed its own fertilized eggs. Inside her stomach, The mother's digestive system shut down entirely. Acid production stopped, muscle activity paused, and her stomach became a living nursery. Dozens of tadpoles developed inside her over several weeks, growing and swimming in the warm, protected space of her own body. When the time came, she gave birth through her mouth, releasing fully formed young frogs into the world one by one. No other vertebrate on Earth has ever been documented doing this. Not before, not since. Scientists discovered this in the 1970s and immediately understood the implications. If a frog could switch off its own stomach acid on command, that mechanism might hold answers to treating human ulcers, stomach disorders, and digestive diseases. The research possibilities were extraordinary. Within 10 years of discovery, both species, the northern and southern gastric-brooding frog, were gone from the wild. A fungal disease called chytrid swept through Australian rainforests with catastrophic speed. Combined with habitat destruction, it eliminated the precise ecological conditions these frogs needed. The delicate world they depended on collapsed before anyone could act. Only a few photographs remain, but the story is not entirely closed. Scientists are currently attempting de-extinction using preserved genetic material, working to recreate embryos and revive a species that science barely had time to understand. If they succeed, the gastric-brooding frog will become one of the first animals ever brought back from extinction, a second chance that the frog itself never received. Number 7. Schomburgk's deer. Schomburgk's deer lived in the wetlands and forested edges surrounding Bangkok. It was a medium-sized deer with one feature that guaranteed its destruction. The males carried enormous branching antlers that spread outward like thick tree limbs. To a trophy hunter in the early 20th century, those antlers were a prize. Trophy hunting had become a symbol of status across Thailand and surrounding regions. A mounted head on the wall represented skill, wealth, and social standing. Hunters pursued the species specifically for those antlers. Every mounted head represented one more animal removed from a population that was already shrinking. While hunters were taking the adults, the land itself was being erased beneath the remaining herds. Bangkok was expanding rapidly. Wetlands were drained for roads, homes, and rice fields. Forests were cleared at a pace that local authorities weren't tracking, and most people assumed Schomburgk's deer still existed in abundance somewhere further out. They didn't. The wetlands around Bangkok were the only habitat this species had ever occupied, and they were gone. By 1938, one deer remained, a single animal standing in a landscape that no longer had any place for it. When it died, the species ended completely. No hidden population survived in a distant valley. No second group was ever found. The entire species was reduced to a single individual over the course of a few decades, and nobody noticed until that individual was already the last. If these stories are hitting different than you expected, go ahead and hit like. It helps more people find this video, and honestly, these animals deserve to be remembered by as many people as possible. We've still got 6 more to go, and the stories only get harder from here. Number 6. The thylacine, Tasmanian tiger. What you are about to hear is the story of an animal killed by a rumor. The thylacine, known as the Tasmanian tiger, had the face of a wolf, the stripes of a tiger, and the biology of a kangaroo. It was a marsupial, more closely related to wombats than to any big cat. It was also shy, cautious, and largely harmless to humans. When it encountered people in the wild, its instinct was to retreat. European settlers arrived in Tasmania in the 19th century and brought livestock with them. When sheep went missing, the thylacine was blamed, often without evidence. Fear turned quickly into hostility. Farmers demanded action. The government responded with a bounty system: kill a thylacine, collect a payment. The official policy of a government was, in effect, the systematic extermination of a species. Hunters flooded the wilderness. Traps were set across the island. Year after year, numbers fell. Habitat loss and disease accelerated what the hunters had started. By the early 20th century, the species was down to a handful of survivors, most of them in captivity. The last known thylacine was kept at the Hobart Zoo in Tasmania. Zookeepers later called the animal Benjamin, though they never confirmed its sex. Benjamin paced the same worn path in a small enclosure, day after day, for years. The short, shaky film captured there, just seconds of a restless animal walking back and forth in a concrete pen, became the only moving image of the species ever recorded. Benjamin's death in September 1936 was not from illness or old age. A zookeeper failed to bring the animal into its heated shelter before locking up for the night. Temperatures dropped. The thylacine spent the entire night exposed to the cold. By morning, the last one on Earth was dead. No breeding program had ever been seriously attempted. No emergency response followed. A single night of negligence ended an entire evolutionary lineage. After the official declaration of extinction, sightings were reported for decades. Search teams walked through dense Tasmanian wilderness, hoping to find even one survivor. None ever did. What they found instead was silence, and a landscape that had once held something extraordinary, and didn't anymore. Number 5. The moa. It stood over 3 meters tall. It weighed close to 250 kilograms. It had no wings at all, not even small vestigial ones, and for thousands of years it had no reason to fear anything. The moa ruled the ancient forests of New Zealand in complete safety. It grazed on leaves, fruits, and high branches that its long neck allowed it to reach easily. It shaped the forest through its browsing habits, kept tree populations balanced, and moved through its world with the unhurried confidence of an animal that had never been hunted. Then, approximately 700 years ago, the first Polynesian settlers, the Maori, reached New Zealand. They found a land with no large land predators, where birds had evolved to fill every ecological niche. The moa, enormous and completely defenseless on the ground, became a critical food source. It provided meat in large quantities. Its bones were shaped into tools. Its feathers were woven into clothing and used for ornamentation. At the same time, forests were burned to clear space for settlements. The moa's habitat shrank while its population was being hunted intensely. A species that had survived for millions of years had no genetic preparation for either pressure. With no ability to fly, no natural fear response, and no defensive instincts against human hunters, the collapse was rapid. Within a few hundred years of human arrival, an almost incomprehensibly short window in evolutionary time, every moa species had vanished. By the 1400s, the last ones were gone, leaving behind bones, broken eggshells, and Maori oral histories that described creatures future generations would struggle to believe had ever been real. One image, widely circulated today, is said to show the last moa ever photographed, a towering bird standing over hunters holding spears. Whether authentic or a staged reconstruction remains debated. Either way, it stands as one of the most haunting visual records of what was lost, a living giant reduced to a disputed photograph and a pile of bones. Number 4. The passenger pigeon. There was a time when the sky above North America went dark, not from storm clouds, but from birds. Passenger pigeons flew in flocks so enormous they blocked out the sun for hours as they passed overhead. Witnesses described their wing beats as rolling thunder, a deep continuous hum that felt less like sound and more like weather. Estimates suggest the species numbered in the billions, possibly 3 to 5 billion at its peak, making it one of the most abundant bird species that has ever existed on Earth. People who witnessed these flocks assumed they were witnessing something permanent, something that could never end. You cannot imagine a world without something that large. European settlers hunted them for meat, cheaply, relentlessly, commercially. Hunters used guns, nets, fire, and sulfur pots to bring down entire roosting flocks at once. The railroad and telegraph made it possible to coordinate hunters across hundreds of kilometers, intercepting flocks that had been spotted days earlier. Nesting grounds were wiped out in single seasons. The birds were shipped to market by the barrel. By the late 1800s, a species that had numbered in the billions had been reduced to scattered individuals. The speed of the collapse shocked even the people doing the hunting. Captive breeding attempts were made, but the passenger pigeon had always relied on enormous flock dynamics to breed successfully. In small numbers, it simply stopped reproducing. The last known passenger pigeon was a female named Martha. She lived at the Cincinnati Zoo, watched daily by visitors who came not because she was impressive to look at, but because she was the final one. On September 1, 1914, she was found on the floor of her enclosure. From several billion to zero in under a century. The passenger pigeon is the most dramatic numerical collapse of any species in recorded history, and it happened fast enough that people who saw the flocks as children lived to see the last bird die in a zoo. If you're not subscribed yet, now is a good time. We cover stories like this, wildlife, extinction, conservation, and there's a lot more coming, Subscribe so you don't miss it. The top 3 on this list are the ones that tend to stay with people longest. Number 3. The eastern heath hen. For thousands of years, the eastern heath hen filled the open grasslands of the northeastern United States with a sound like distant drums, a deep, resonant booming that rolled across the fields during the spring mating season. Males would puff up their chests, spread tiny horn-shaped feathers from the sides of their necks, and display with a kind of furious precision, calling for mates in fields that stretched to the horizon. By the early 20th century, those fields were gone. Farms had replaced the grasslands. Hunters had treated the heath hen as a game bird and a delicacy for generations, shooting them in enormous numbers without regulation. A species that had once been abundant across New York and New Jersey had been pushed into a single isolated population on Martha's Vineyard, an island off the coast of Massachusetts. For a moment, it seemed isolation might save them. Conservation laws were passed. Hunting was banned. The remaining birds were protected, and their numbers slowly began to climb. People believed the heath hen might recover. Then wildfires swept across the island. Then a particularly harsh winter followed. Then a disease moved through the survivors. Each disaster hit a population that was already too small to absorb the losses, and each time the numbers dropped further. By 1927, 13 remained in the entire world. The last one was a male. He returned to the same open field every spring, booming into the empty air, waiting for a response that never came. Wildlife observers who documented him gave him a name, Booming Ben. He kept returning, season after season, alone, until he was seen for the last time in 1932. Ben didn't know he was the last. He just kept showing up, doing the only thing he knew to do. That detail, a bird calling into an empty field because it doesn't know the rest are gone, is the part of this story that tends to stay with people. Number 2. The Baiji River dolphin. For more than 20 million years, the Baiji River dolphin lived in the Yangtze. It outlasted ice ages. It survived geological upheaval that reshaped entire continents. It adapted to every change the river could produce over 20 million years of continuous existence. It couldn't survive 50 years of industrialization. The Baiji, known in China as the goddess of the Yangtze, navigated the river's dark, murky water using sonar refined over millions of years of evolution. In the 1950s, thousands were still swimming through the river's currents. By the 1980s, only a few hundred remained. By the early 2000s, the number had fallen so far that scientists were using words like functionally extinct in their reports. The threats compounded each other in a way that made individual solutions useless. Pollution made the dolphins sick. Overfishing depleted their food supply. Heavy commercial boat traffic filled the river with noise that scrambled their sonar, the very system they depended on to navigate and hunt. Many were killed by fast-moving propellers. The construction of the Three Gorges Dam eliminated some of the last stretches of undisturbed habitat. Scientists created protected zones. They attempted captive breeding. But the Baiji had never lived in confined spaces, and captivity proved lethal for most individuals caught. One male, named Chi-Chi, survived in captivity for over 22 years and became a symbol of the species, the last face people could put to the Baiji's story. When Chi-Chi died in 2002, the fear was that the wild population was already gone. In 2006, an international team launched one of the largest river expeditions ever organized. Ships and sonar teams traveling the entire length of the Yangtze for 39 days, covering every accessible section of the waterway. They found nothing. No fins breaking the surface, no sonar echoes from below, no sign of a living Baiji anywhere in the river. The expedition concluded that the Baiji was functionally extinct, the first dolphin species ever driven to extinction by human activity. A species that had survived 20 million years in that river was gone within a single human lifetime. Number 1. The toolache wallaby. Movements so fluid they were described as a dance, a natural elegance that made the animal look like it had been designed by someone with aesthetics in mind, rather than survival. The toolache wallaby was first formally described in 1846. Even at that moment, its world was already contracting. Farmland was spreading across its native grasslands in southeastern Australia. Fences cut through its territory. Introduced predators moved into spaces that had once been safe. And then, predictably, hunting began. A wallaby this visually striking attracted hunters the way anything beautiful attracts people who want to possess it. By the 1920s, only a handful remained in the wild. Scientists recognized the collapse and acted. 14 wallabies were captured for an emergency breeding program. 10 of them died during or shortly after capture. The species was so sensitive to stress that the act of trying to save it contributed to its destruction. 4 survivors were taken to captivity, where researchers worked to establish a breeding population. None were ever born in captivity. The last wild individuals were seen in 1924. After that, only rumors remained. Scattered reports of shadowy shapes glimpsed at dusk on the edge of farmland. Never confirmed, never followed up with evidence. The final toolache wallaby was a female living in a zoo. She died the same year the wild population disappeared, closing the last door on the species entirely. The photograph taken of her, the last known image of any toolache wallaby, shows a small, still animal with calm eyes. Nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic, just an animal that doesn't know it's the last one, looking at a camera, on an ordinary day that happened to be the end. That's how most of these stories end. Not with a dramatic final moment. With a photograph, a date, and a silence that follows. 10 animals, 10 last photographs. 10 moments where an entire species was reduced to a single image and then nothing. Some of these extinctions took centuries. Some took decades. The passenger pigeon took less than a human lifetime, from billions to zero, while people who had watched the sky darken with them were still alive. If any one of these stories stayed with you, drop the animal's name in the comments. And if you think more people should know these stories exist, share this video.